In Manchester's underworld, loyalty doesn't mean much, especially when there's money, pride, or revenge on the line. Thomas Campbell learned that the hard way. He thought he was solid, a well-connected dealer, moving weight, known in the right circles, but none of that mattered when his own ex gave up his location and its rival locked in on him with one word: tomorrow. They planted a tracker under his van, waited for the perfect moment, and when it came, they pounced, dragged into his own house, tied up, beaten, stabbed, burned with boiling water. 2 hours of straight violence. This wasn't a robbery, it was a statement, and the message was clear: nobody's untouchable. The job was planned by a known name on the streets, John Belfield, a man still missing, still wanted, still dangerous. But the people around him, they slipped. A CCTV clip, a phone call, a tracking device, and just like that, the whole thing started to fall apart. This is how the murder of Thomas Campbell wasn't just brutal, it was precise, and how one slip cracked open a conspiracy between a jealous ex, a fugitive, and 2-foot soldiers with a taste for blood. He had money, connections, a reputation. He was a man people knew not to cross, someone who had spent years climbing through the ranks of organized crime. Cocaine, cash, and calculated silence, that was his world. He wasn't flashy, no gold chains, no wild social media posts, but he had presence, a quiet kind of danger, the type you felt in the room before he even said a word. But in the summer of 2022, someone decided Thomas Campbell needed to be taken out, not robbed, not warned, eliminated. The order didn't come from a rival gang or a stranger on the street. It came from someone closer, someone who knew his routines, someone who knew exactly where he would be and when. Thomas had enemies, but the betrayal that ended his life started at home with his ex-wife, Colleen Campbell. They'd been through it all: drugs, prison, dirty money, and a crumbling marriage. But even after it ended, their lives stayed connected. They shared kids. They had history. She knew how he moved, where he lived, who he trusted, and she used it, but she didn't act alone. Behind the scenes was another name, John Belfield. Only 28, but already feared. Belfield wasn't just a drug dealer. He was an operator, ruthless, paranoid, always planning, and he had a reason to hate Thomas. That reason? A woman. Belfield's ex-girlfriend had started seeing Campbell, and for Belfield that was more than disrespect, it was personal. So he started watching, not from a distance but with purpose. He gathered intel, built a plan, and pulled Colleen in to help. She became his inside source. Over weeks, she sent him updates. Who Thomas was seeing, where he was going, what time he came home. She even gave him the layout of the house, and that's when Belfield made a decision. Thomas Campbell had to go. But he wasn't going to send a warning. He wasn't going to shoot from a car or arrange a hit on the street. That wasn't his style. He wanted to send a message, one that echoed across Manchester. So they started laying the groundwork. The first step, a GPS tracker under Thomas's van. It was hidden, tight up against the chassis. Every time he drove, every stop he made, it was recorded. The team behind the scenes could see his location in real time, straight from their phones. And they watched for days. There was one failed attempt. Thomas came home late one night but took his dog for a walk instead of heading straight inside. The attackers were already in place but called it off. Too much risk, not the right moment. They waited. And when the second chance came, there was no hesitation. Belfield sent Colleen a one-word message: tomorrow. No need for details, no need for questions. Everyone involved knew exactly what that meant. Thomas Campbell's time was up. By the time Thomas Campbell walked into his house on July 2nd, 2022, everything had already been decided. The attackers weren't scrambling last minute. This wasn't improvised, it was rehearsed. Every movement, every second, a planned takedown, carefully timed and coldly executed. 3 men had been lined up for the job. At the top of the list, Reese Stephen, a career criminal with a violent past and nothing to lose. Armed, masked, and ready to carry out whatever Belfield had in mind. The second was Stephen Cleworth. He wasn't physically there the night Thomas died, but that didn't matter. In the days before the ambush, Cleworth had been in deep, planning meetings, surveillance runs, mapping out the job. The only reason he didn't show was because he'd gone missing on a bender, high out of his mind at a swingers club the night of the hit. But absence isn't innocence. He'd already played his part. They weren't just there to kill, they were there to make a statement. When Thomas arrived home that night, the house was quiet. Just him, his front door, and a sense of routine. That's what made it easy. Predictability. The second he stepped inside, the trap sprung. He barely had time to react. The door burst open and they were on him. 3 against 1. Heavy punches, struggling, kicking. He fought like hell. For nearly 40 seconds, he refused to go down. Swinging, screaming, refusing to be dragged without a fight. But it wasn't enough. They forced him inside, slammed the door shut, and started the real work. What followed wasn't just violence, it was torture. He was tied up, duct tape around his ankles, stripped, beaten, stabbed. But that wasn't all. These weren't men looking for a quick death. They were there to inflict pain, real, lasting pain. They poured boiling water over his body, burned him, kept going long after he'd stopped fighting back. In total, he suffered at least 61 separate injuries, cuts, burns, blunt force trauma. His body was wrecked from head to toe, and the assault didn't last 5 minutes. It went on for 2 full hours. They ransacked the place during it, tore through rooms looking for cash, coke, anything worth taking. But even that seemed like an afterthought. This wasn't about profit. It was about punishment. At one point, somehow, Thomas managed to crawl to his phone. He dialed 999, maybe hoping someone would get there in time, maybe just trying to stay alive a few minutes longer. The recording captured the emergency operator's voice, calm, professional. Fire, police, or ambulance. If you can't speak, tap the handset, cough, make a noise. Silence. He couldn't respond, couldn't move, couldn't even speak. By the time the attackers left, Thomas was broken, alone, naked except for a pair of socks, lying in the hallway of his own home, dying. His body wouldn't be discovered until the next day when a neighbor noticed the front door left ajar and went to check. Inside, they found the aftermath, blood on the walls, signs of a violent struggle, and Thomas Campbell, dead, duct-taped and dumped like rubbish in the place he was supposed to be safest. The killers had tried to wipe it down, erase evidence, clean up, but no plan is perfect, and what they left behind would come back to haunt them. The killers thought they'd done enough. The scene was chaotic, but they'd taken steps, wiping surfaces, gloves, quick exits. They figured it was over, that Campbell's death would be written off as a drug beef gone wrong. No witnesses, no CCTV in the house, no weapons left behind. In their minds, the job was done. But crime scenes always talk, and this one spoke volumes. The first mistake, they left the GPS tracker on Campbell's van. When detectives from Greater Manchester Police arrived and secured the scene, it didn't take them long to find it. Still attached under the chassis, still holding location data, not just from the night of the murder, but from days and weeks before. Police downloaded everything, the van's route, history, its stops, times, GPS coordinates, and from there the investigation began to tighten. Next came forensics. Crime scene investigators combed the house from top to bottom, blood on the staircase, spatter on the hallway walls, drag marks, broken furniture, duct tape with trace DNA still attached. Even fingerprints, smudged, partial, but still viable. Every room told a story. Then they pulled Thomas's phone records. He hadn't been active for long before the attack, but the 999 call, though silent, was time-stamped. That gave them a window, a frame of time where the assault took place. That's when they started checking the neighbor's CCTV. There was no direct camera on the front door, but across the street and one house down, someone had a motion-activated camera, and it caught something important. Headlights pulling away late at night, a dark car, 3 men. Not enough for a conviction, but enough to ask questions. They followed up with phone tower data, checked what devices had pinged off nearby cell towers in the 2-hour window around the murder. One number stood out, a burner phone that had only been activated days before and went dark right after the murder. But police could trace it, and they did. It linked back to Reese Stephen. His DNA was also found on the duct tape used to bind Campbell's ankles. 18 prior convictions: robbery, assault, possession of an imitation firearm. He was no stranger to violence and no stranger to planning it. Then came Colleen Campbell. At first, she acted shocked, said she had no idea, claimed she'd spoken to her ex recently, but denied any role in what happened. The police weren't convinced. They already had her phone, and inside it they found a web of contact points between her and John Belfield. Messages, calls, pings, not just casual conversations, detailed exchanges in the days leading up to the murder, times, places, routine check-ins. She knew where Thomas would be that night. She'd sent that info to Belfield. And then, the day before the murder, she got the message from him. Tomorrow. It wasn't direct, but the context was clear. She wasn't just involved, she'd helped set the trap. From there, the operation shifted. What had started as a murder case became a full-scale conspiracy investigation. Because behind the physical violence was a plan, and behind that plan was someone who was still missing. John Belfield, the man who had sent the message, the man who'd vanished before police could get close, the man who turned a street-level feud into one of the most cold-blooded killings Manchester had seen in years. By late summer 2022, Greater Manchester Police had more than just a murder. They had a digital trail, a conspiracy, and suspects who were already starting to slip. Reese Stephen was the first major name to fall. His DNA on the duct tape placed him at the scene. Cell tower data put his burner phone near Campbell's house that night. His previous convictions painted a picture: violent, organized, and no stranger to planned attacks. When police brought him in, he denied everything, said he had no idea what they were talking about, claimed the phone wasn't his. But the evidence said otherwise, and next came Stephen Cleworth. He wasn't at the murder scene. That much was true. In fact, on the night of the killing, he'd been at a swingers club on a drug binge. CCTV showed him entering with others, out of his mind, but detectives weren't interested in where he was that night. They were interested in where he'd been before. Surveillance footage from earlier in the week showed Cleworth meeting with Reese Stephen and John Belfield. Timing matched up. They'd been scouting locations, tracking Campbell's movements. Cleworth may have missed the main event, but he helped write the script. And then there was Colleen Campbell. Her role was becoming clearer by the day. Detectives recovered dozens of messages exchanged between her and Belfield in the lead up to the murder. Surveillance from 2 hours before the attack caught her on the phone with him. GPS logs put her close to the planning meetings. She claimed she had no idea what Belfield was planning. But when police looked at the pattern, her texts, her tone, her timing, her defense started to fall apart. She knew what was coming. She didn't stop it. And she'd helped set it in motion. As the net closed around the suspects, detectives focused on tying all three together, proving this wasn't just a murder, but a conspiracy to rob and kill. Because while the attackers stole some items from the house, including cash and personal effects, police believed the robbery was just the excuse. The real motive was personal, emotional, driven by revenge. Still, one key piece was missing: John Belfield. He hadn't been arrested, hadn't been seen. By the time warrants were issued, he was gone, off the grid. The man at the center of it all had vanished. Police believed he left the country, possibly using fake documents. The National Crime Agency issued an alert. Border Force was notified, but nothing turned up. No passport movements, no financial transactions, just silence. Still, GMP pushed forward with what they had. Enough to go to trial, enough to secure convictions. They weren't just dealing with a murder, they were dealing with a blueprint, planned out, executed step by step, and tracked through modern technology: phones, GPS, CCTV, digital crumbs. It wasn't a case cracked by eyewitnesses or street whispers. It was solved by data, surveillance, and the arrogance of people who thought they were invisible. February 2023. The trial began at Bolton Crown Court. The courtroom was packed. Press, family members, and police who had spent months dissecting every detail of the murder. On trial were three key figures: Reese Stephen, Stephen Cleworth, and Colleen Campbell. John Belfield, the suspected mastermind, was still on the run. The prosecution came armed with a mountain of evidence: CCTV timelines, cell site analysis, GPS tracking data, and forensic reports. But what made the case watertight wasn't just the volume, it was the clarity. Reese Stephen had his fingerprints on the duct tape used to bind Campbell's ankles. His DNA was in the house. His phone was tracked moving from the murder scene to his home in Droylsden, and his browsing history showed searches for boiling water injuries just days before the attack. The prosecution argued he was one of the main attackers, personally involved in the torture and killing. His prior convictions didn't help his case either. In the eyes of the jury, he was exactly who he appeared to be, a violent man who did what he was told. Then there was Cleworth. He hadn't been at the crime scene, but prosecutors painted him as a planner, a man who helped track Campbell's movements, a man who met with Belfield and Stephen days before the murder. And while he spent the night of the killing on a cocaine-fueled session at a swingers club, the Crown said that didn't change a thing. He was part of the setup. And in the world of conspiracy, that was enough. Colleen Campbell's role was more complex. She didn't commit the murder, she didn't pour boiling water over her ex-husband, but prosecutors argued she handed Belfield the playbook. She told him when Thomas would be home. She described his routines, his van, and even helped with surveillance. Her defense was simple. She didn't know what they were planning, but the evidence told a different story, one of cooperation, one of betrayal. Messages from her phone showed a steady stream of updates to Belfield, locations, confirmations, and finally the one-word message that prosecutors believed sealed her fate. There. Sent just minutes before the ambush began. All three denied the charges. All three claimed they weren't involved or didn't know what would happen. But the jury didn't buy it. After weeks of testimony and evidence, the verdicts came down hard. Reese Stephen, guilty of murder and conspiracy to rob. Stephen Cleworth, guilty of manslaughter and conspiracy. Colleen Campbell, also guilty of manslaughter and conspiracy. They weren't convicted based on stories or theories. They were convicted by timestamps, text messages, cell tower pings, and digital maps. Technology that laid bare their movements, their contacts, and their intentions. The judge didn't hold back in sentencing. Reese Stephen was handed a life sentence with a minimum of 37 years. The court called him ruthless, brutal, and remorseless. Cleworth received a life sentence too, but with a minimum of 12 years due to his absence at the murder scene. Still, his role in the planning made him complicit. Colleen Campbell was sentenced to 13 years. The judge called her betrayal chilling, noting that without her inside knowledge, the plot may never have succeeded. But even with those convictions, the case still felt unfinished. Because the man who started it all, the man police believed obsessed over revenge, who tracked Campbell for weeks and recruited the others, was still out there. John Belfield had vanished, and Greater Manchester Police weren't giving up. While 3 defendants were locked up, the man who sparked it all was still missing. John Belfield didn't just vanish, he planned his disappearance the same way he planned the murder. Precise, quiet, slippery. By the time GMP moved in to arrest him, Belfield was gone. The working theory? He'd left the country, maybe using fake documents, maybe helped by contacts in the criminal world. Either way, he didn't leave a trail. Greater Manchester Police launched an international manhunt. An Interpol red notice was issued. Airports and border agencies were put on high alert. His name was now on every watch list. But there were no confirmed sightings, no passport movements, no financial slips. Belfield had dropped off the grid, and not just physically, digitally too. No social media, no phone activity, no burner pings. Whoever helped him knew what they were doing. The National Crime Agency stepped in, intelligence units started digging, looking into past associates, monitoring communications, watching movements across Europe. Belfield had connections, particularly in Spain, a hotspot for British fugitives, but for months there was nothing solid. Still, police were confident. Because eventually people get sloppy, they trust the wrong person, make the wrong call. And when you're a wanted man connected to a torture murder, there's no such thing as a quiet life.